Have you ever been in a moment where everything around you was silent, yet something inside you began to speak louder than thunder? That moment when heaven seemed to lean down and God Himself whispered your name. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share with you is not just a story, it's a divine encounter that will awaken your spirit to hear the whisper of God in your own life. There was a day when my life seemed ordinary, until eternity stepped into my room. I wasn't expecting it, I wasn't praying for a visitation, but somewhere between my weariness and my worship, the presence of God began to surround me like a gentle wind. And in that moment, I heard something I can never forget. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't thunder, it was a whisper, soft but filled with power. It carried my name. When God whispers your name, everything inside you changes. Fear loses its grip, confusion melts away, and what you once thought was the end becomes the beginning of a divine chapter. That's why I want you to stay with me, because before this message ends, you'll understand how to hear that same whisper for yourself. You'll know what happens when God calls your name, not from a distance, but from within your very spirit. Before God whispers, He often brings silence. There's a divine pattern in how heaven speaks. The Almighty rarely shouts into the noise of men's chaos. He waits for the stillness, the pause, the holy hush that allows your soul to breathe. You see, in our world, silence often feels like emptiness. We crave sound, we seek movement, we fear stillness. But God does some of His greatest work in silence. When you find yourself surrounded by quiet, when your prayers feel unanswered, and your heart feels distant, that's not a sign of abandonment, it's preparation. God is quieting the storm so that His whisper will not be drowned by the echoes of your own thoughts. He's teaching your spirit to listen beyond the surface, to lean into the unseen realm where His voice carries the weight of eternity. When God wants to speak, He first clears the stage. The silence is His way of removing distractions, of tuning your ears to frequencies the world cannot hear. Think about Elijah on the mountain. He looked for God in the wind, in the earthquake, in the fire. But the Lord was not in any of those. It was only after the noise had passed that Elijah heard the still small voice. The whisper came after the shaking, after the noise, after the fire had burned out. God was saying, I do not need volume to reveal my power. The whisper of God carries more authority than the thunder of nations. It is not the sound that gives the voice power. It is the source. When heaven breathes, creation listens. When God whispers, the universe pauses. But before you can hear Him, He must still the storm within you. There are times when silence stretches longer than you expect. Days, months, even years go by without that clear sense of direction, and you start to wonder if heaven forgot your name. You pray, but the words feel heavy. You worship, but it feels like your voice disappears into space. Yet it's in that silence that God is training your discernment. He is developing the ability to recognize Him, not by emotion, but by presence. The same way a mother knows her child's cry in a crowded room, your spirit begins to know the tone of God's whisper, even when your mind cannot explain it. The silence is the classroom of revelation. It's where God builds the sensitivity of your heart, not through noise, but through stillness. It's where He teaches you that His presence isn't proven by how loud the atmosphere feels, but by how peaceful your soul becomes. When you walk with God long enough, you begin to understand that silence is not absence. It's intimacy. When two people know each other deeply, they don't always need words. Their hearts communicate through stillness. That's how God communes with His children. Sometimes He doesn't say a thing, yet your heart knows exactly what He means. That awareness doesn't come through business, through constant noise, through endless activity. It comes when you rest. Be still and know that I am God. Stillness is the soil where revelation grows. It's in that sacred quiet that the whisper begins to form. It's not a random moment. It's a divine setup. God is positioning you to receive something eternal, something that will shift not just your circumstance, but your very identity. You see, the world trains us to equate silence with weakness, but heaven uses it as strength. God doesn't rush. He's not pressured by deadlines or driven by panic. When He is silent, He's working in ways you can't see. He's aligning hearts, opening doors, closing others, and preparing the atmosphere so that when His whisper comes, it carries completion. The silence is the womb of your destiny. It's where dreams are formed and faith is matured. And though it feels like nothing is happening, something powerful is being shaped behind the curtain of time. God is not ignoring you. He's perfecting what concerns you. Sometimes silence exposes our dependence on noise. We've become so accustomed to hearing sermons, songs, and opinions that we forget what His pure voice sounds like. And so God removes the noise. He lets the crowd fade. He allows the distractions to die down until the only sound left is your heartbeat and the breath of heaven. That's where the encounter begins. That's where revelation is born. When you finally stop striving to hear and you simply rest in His presence, you begin to perceive His whisper, not as a sound, but as a knowing deep within your spirit. The whisper is not always heard by the ear. It's perceived by the heart. It bypasses your reasoning and lands straight into your spirit, awakening a sense of peace that defies understanding. Many people miss God's whisper because they expect it to match their emotion. They think it will come wrapped in fireworks, in thunder and lightning, in dramatic manifestations. But God's ways are higher. His voice doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is. He speaks in simplicity so that only those who truly seek Him will hear. The whisper is not for the curious, it's for the consecrated. It's not for those looking for noise. It's for those who have learned to quiet their souls. That's why before every great move of God in your life, He will bring a season of silence. He will hide you. He will strip away the unnecessary, separate you from distractions, and let you sit in the stillness. It's not punishment. It's purification. He's fine-tuning your hearing so that when He finally whispers your name, you'll know beyond doubt it's Him. The silence before the whisper is a sacred invitation. God is saying, will you trust me even when you can't trace me? Will you still worship me when I don't respond the way you expect? Will you rest in me even when my voice feels far away? Because faith isn't proven in noise. It's proven in quiet trust. The silence before the whisper builds spiritual maturity. It teaches you that your relationship with God is not dependent on emotional highs, but on consistent faith. The longer you walk with Him, the more you realize that His silence speaks volumes. In His quiet, He is speaking direction. In His pause, He is releasing power. In His stillness, He is forming your next season. There's a holy beauty in the way God speaks through stillness. When you stop fighting for noise and begin to lean into His peace, you discover the whisper was never far away. It was waiting behind the veil of silence all along. The same God who spoke creation into existence now waits to whisper destiny into your spirit. He's not shouting because He's close. The whisper means intimacy. The silence means proximity. And though your mind may not understand the quiet, your spirit begins to sense the nearness of His presence. The silence before the whisper isn't a void. It's the breath of God gathering before He speaks your name. God doesn't compete with chaos. He speaks peace in the middle of it. His whisper is not born from noise, it cuts through it. When God speaks, He doesn't raise His voice to be heard above the world. He lowers it so that your heart must draw closer. The whisper of God is not about volume, it's about intimacy. You cannot hear His whisper if you are running in every direction, trying to solve everything on your own. You have to slow down, lean in, and listen with the ear of your spirit. The world teaches us to react to every sound, every problem, every opinion. But God teaches us to listen, to discern, to separate the temporary from the eternal. His whisper does not come to those who are distracted. It comes to those who are desperate for His presence. The whisper of God is gentle but filled with authority. It doesn't shake the ground, but it shakes your soul. It doesn't cause an earthquake outside, but it creates one within. When God whispers, it's not to inform you, it's to transform you. His voice carries creative power. When He said, "Let there be light," creation wasn't a suggestion. It was a command wrapped in sound. That same creative force lives in His whisper to you. When He speaks peace, storms bow. When He whispers healing, sickness loses its hold. When He calls your name, everything tied to your past begins to fall away. That's why learning to recognize the whisper of God is not optional. It's vital. It's the lifeline of your spirit, the compass of your destiny, the voice that separates divine truth from human noise. You see, the human ear can hear sound, but only the spirit can recognize God. There are moments when His whisper doesn't even register in words. It comes as a stirring, a gentle nudge, a knowing that doesn't make sense to your logic but feels undeniable in your heart. You might be driving, walking, or sitting in silence, and suddenly you feel something inside saying, "Wait," or "Go," or "This is the way." That's not your mind, that's your spirit catching the frequency of heaven. God's whisper bypasses your intellect because it's not meant to be analyzed. It's meant to be received. His voice flows through peace, not pressure. Whenever you sense confusion, that's not God's voice. The whisper of God always carries peace, even when it challenges your comfort. It never creates panic. It creates assurance. There's a sacred stillness that accompanies the whisper. You can almost feel time slow down. Your breathing steadies, your thoughts quiet, and in that holy moment something within you says, "He's here." You begin to sense His presence not as a feeling but as a reality. It's not about goosebumps or emotions. It's about awareness. The whisper awakens the part of you that was asleep. It reminds you that you are not alone, that heaven knows your name, that even in your struggle, the voice of God has never stopped calling. And once you've heard that whisper, you can never be satisfied with anything else. The noise of the world begins to lose its pull because your soul has tasted something eternal. You've discovered that God doesn't need to shout when He's that close. When God whispers, He's inviting you into partnership. He doesn't speak just to make you feel good. He speaks to align you with His will. Every whisper carries an instruction, a divine clue about your next step. Sometimes it's simple. Pray, forgive, wait, so move, trust. These small whispers are seeds of destiny. They may seem insignificant at first, but when obeyed, they unlock supernatural doors. You might not even realize how powerful that inner prompting was until years later when you look back and see how one whisper redirected your entire life. That's the nature of His voice, subtle yet sovereign, gentle yet full of fire. The whisper is never random. Every word from God is purposeful. Every syllable is soaked in divine intention. Learning to recognize His whisper requires relationship. You cannot discern the voice of God without walking with Him. You cannot recognize His tone if you only visit Him on Sundays or when life gets heavy. His whisper becomes clear when you've spent enough time in His presence that His voice becomes familiar. Just like a shepherd's sheep know His voice, your spirit learns to distinguish His tone among 1,000 others. The more time you spend in prayer, in the Word, in worship, the more your spiritual ear is tuned. God doesn't hide His voice from you. He hides it for you. It's reserved for those who seek, for those who hunger. When you chase after Him not for blessings, but for fellowship, the whisper becomes a daily companion. The whisper of God is also protective. It warns before danger, comforts before storms, and strengthens before battles. There are times when you'll sense that still, quiet voice saying, "Don't go," or "Wait," or "This isn't for you." That's not fear, it's divine foresight. God sees what's ahead, and through His whisper, He gently redirects your path. When you learn to obey that inner voice, you begin to walk under divine timing. You avoid unnecessary battles, missed opportunities, and heartache that comes from ignoring divine caution. The whisper becomes your shield, your secret weapon, your guide through life's uncertainty. Every time you listen, heaven adjusts your steps to align with purpose. The enemy, however, will always try to mimic the whisper. He knows he can't overpower God, so he tries to confuse you. He'll speak through doubt, through temptation, through urgency that lacks peace. That's why discerning God's whisper requires stillness and testing. The true voice of God never contradicts His word. It always produces peace, humility, and love. It draws you closer to Him, not further away. The whisper of God never flatters the flesh. It always refines the spirit. It doesn't feed pride. It nurtures obedience. When you know the difference, you won't be deceived by noise that sounds holy but lacks power. You'll recognize the true whisper by the fruit it bears in your heart. When you start walking with an awareness of God's whisper, life takes on a different rhythm. You stop rushing. You stop reacting. You start responding from a place of peace. You realize that divine direction is not found in the loud moments, but in the quiet ones. You learn that the same God who created the galaxies also takes time to speak softly to your spirit. That thought alone humbles you. It reminds you that His whisper is not a small thing. It's a sacred privilege. The Creator of all things bending down to speak to His creation in love, calling you by name, guiding you by His Spirit, and trusting you to hear Him. There's a level of closeness that only comes through recognizing His whisper. When you live aware of His presence, even the smallest prompting becomes holy. You begin to sense Him in daily life, in decisions, in delays, in interruptions. You realize that His whisper isn't confined to prayer rooms or pulpits. It's with you in traffic, in work, in quiet mornings and sleepless nights. The whisper becomes a rhythm of grace, a heartbeat of heaven that keeps you connected to divine flow. You begin to trust that no matter how chaotic the world becomes, God's voice is constant. It doesn't fade in storms. It doesn't tremble under pressure. It remains steady, strong, and near, and the more you listen, the clearer it becomes. His whisper grows louder in your spirit, not because He raises His volume, but because your distractions decrease. The closer you draw to Him, the less He needs to say, because your heart begins to move in sync with His will. The whisper becomes more than communication. It becomes communion. It's no longer about hearing words. It's about living in His presence. The whisper of God is not just something you hear, it's something you carry. It shapes your thoughts, guides your steps, and becomes the atmosphere of your soul. When God calls your name, it is never casual. It is never a matter of coincidence or chance. There is a weight, a divine gravity, attached to the utterance of your name by the lips of heaven. Every time He speaks it, it carries authority, purpose, and destiny. The very moment you hear it, your spirit senses the alignment of eternity with your life. God's voice is not like the voices of men. It is creative, transformative, and full of intention. When He calls your name, He is not simply acknowledging your existence. He is revealing who you were created to be, the assignment He placed in your hands before the foundation of the world. That whisper carries identity, and identity is power. The moment God whispers your name, something inside begins to awaken. There is a recognition deep within the spirit that cannot be ignored. You may not see it outwardly, but internally, your DNA of destiny begins to respond. Every limitation, every fear, every lie the enemy has planted in your mind begins to lose its authority. There is a breaking power in the simple act of hearing God call your name. It is not just an auditory event, it is a spiritual ignition. Your faith stirs, your courage rises, and your vision of who you are in Christ becomes clearer. That whisper carries more impact than any human encouragement, any motivational speech, or any worldly affirmation could ever produce. Throughout Scripture, we see God using this principle. When He called Abram, it was more than a name. It was a covenant. When He called Samuel in the middle of the night, it was more than recognition. It was commissioning. When He called Moses from the burning bush, it was more than attention. It was revelation. Every time heaven speaks a name, it is signaling an awakening, a divine calling that transcends human logic. The weight of that whisper carries responsibility, destiny, and an invitation to step into the miraculous. It is never casual because God never wastes words. His speech is intentional, precise, and full of power. When He calls you, it is because there is something in you that heaven has already identified as capable of carrying His plan. Hearing your name spoken by God transforms your perception of yourself. No longer are you defined by mistakes, by failures, by rejection, or by the limitations of the world around you. When heaven calls your name, it establishes your identity in a higher authority. The enemy may have labeled you weak, the world may have written you off, but God's whisper cancels every negative decree. It speaks over your past, your present, and your future, and in that single divine utterance, your spirit begins to rise above circumstances. That is why listening to the whisper is so vital. It does not merely inform, it redefines. It restores vision, revives hope, and realigns your soul with eternal purpose. The whisper of your name carries a sense of intimacy that nothing else can replicate. God could have spoken to multitudes, could have sent visions, angels, or proclamations, yet He chooses to speak personally to you. That personal calling is not only comforting, it is powerful. It is a signal that you are not lost in the crowd, that your existence is known and valued in the eyes of eternity. There is a difference between hearing about God's plans and being personally called into them. The whisper personalizes destiny. It tells you that heaven has an assignment reserved just for your hands, a mission that your life is uniquely equipped to accomplish. The weight of that realization cannot be measured. It ignites faith, courage, and obedience. Obedience flows naturally when you hear God call your name. When heaven personally engages with your spirit, resistance begins to fall away. You are no longer motivated merely by fear or reward. You are motivated by recognition from the Creator. When He whispers, "John, Mary, child of mine," it is as if the cosmos itself aligns to confirm your steps. You begin to move in the realm of supernatural alignment where provision, protection, and power are synchronized with your actions. That whisper removes doubt and replaces it with certainty. It doesn't demand proof, it establishes conviction. The mere sound of your name from God is enough to stir your spirit, awaken your faith, and propel you into action that defies human reasoning. There is a transformative power embedded in the sound of your name. Your name is your identity. It represents your being, your purpose, and your potential. When God speaks it, He activates the possibilities He has embedded in you. Every spiritual gift, every talent, every seed of destiny begins to respond. The same way Jesus called Peter from the water, bringing him to solid ground, God's whisper calls forth hidden potential. What was dormant begins to awaken, what was bound begins to loosen, and what was hidden begins to manifest. That whisper becomes the catalyst for growth, for breakthrough, and for manifestation of divine will in your life. When you hear God call your name, you enter into a dimension where the impossible becomes possible, because the Creator Himself is drawing you into alignment with His power. Your name carries history, but God's whisper carries future. When heaven calls your name, He is not just referencing who you have been. He is revealing who you can become. The whisper is a bridge from past limitations to future destiny. Every trial you've endured, every setback you faced, is redirected in the presence of that whisper. The moment your name is spoken, chains begin to break, obstacles begin to dissolve, and a supernatural strategy is imparted. Your identity, once tied to human circumstance, is now anchored in divine authority. You are reminded that God's perspective is higher than human understanding, that His plans are not hindered by failure, and that His calling is greater than any obstacle in your path. Hearing your name from God also creates a sense of responsibility. It awakens the realization that your life is not your own. There is a divine assignment, a calling that demands response, faith, and obedience. The whisper is not just for comfort, it is for commission. Every time God calls your name, He is inviting you to participate in His eternal plan. That calling may involve service, it may involve sacrifice, it may involve stepping out of comfort into the unknown, but the power to fulfill it accompanies the whisper. The name spoken carries authority, and the authority demands action. The whisper is not idle, it is a declaration of purpose that compels movement, obedience, and alignment with the will of God. Hearing God's whisper awakens spiritual sensitivity. Once your name has been called by heaven, you begin to notice things differently. You see the hand of God in situations where before you saw only chaos. You perceive opportunities where others perceive obstacles. You sense danger before it arrives and discern truth from deception with increasing clarity. That whisper sharpens your spiritual senses, aligning your perception with divine insight. Your heart becomes a listening post for heaven. Every circumstance, every interaction, every decision is now filtered through the awareness that your life has been personally touched and directed by the Creator. The whisper of God doesn't just call, it illuminates. It clarifies and it directs. That the weight of hearing your name spoken by God is both humbling and empowering. It is humbling because you realize the greatness of the Creator who knows you individually. It is empowering because you understand that you are entrusted with a portion of His plan, that your life has significance beyond the temporal. That whisper carries purpose, calling, identity, and destiny in a single divine utterance. When God calls your name, it is an event that alters the trajectory of your life. It ignites faith, transforms perception, and awakens potential. It is not merely a sound. It is a declaration of destiny, a divine alignment that cannot be ignored. The moment God calls your name, your spirit responds. Faith rises, courage awakens, and the understanding of purpose deepens. Your identity in Christ solidifies, and the whisper begins to echo in your life long after it is first heard. The calling becomes a compass, guiding your steps, influencing your decisions, and shaping your relationships. The power of that divine utterance cannot be measured by human standards. It transforms the very fabric of your existence. It is the moment when your soul recognizes that heaven is aware, that God is near, and that your life is part of a grand, eternal narrative that stretches beyond time and circumstance. The whisper of your name by God is transformative because it aligns you with eternity. It shifts your focus from the temporary to the eternal, from the seen to the unseen, from the natural to the supernatural. Your perspective changes. Your purpose becomes clearer. Your faith grows stronger. Your obedience becomes easier. And in that alignment, doors open, chains break, and new seasons are unlocked. That whisper is more than a sound. It is an awakening, a call to identity, and a divine recalibration of your destiny. One whisper from God can do what 1,000 sermons cannot. The power in the voice of heaven is not measured by volume, but by authority. When God speaks, even in the quietest tone, it penetrates the deepest places of your spirit. It has the power to break strongholds, to lift burdens, and to awaken faith that has long been dormant. You can sit in a sanctuary filled with thousands, hear many messages, and be inspired temporarily, but one whisper from God in your own moment has the ability to shift your entire life. It is personal, it is intimate, and it carries a weight that cannot be duplicated by human eloquence or persuasion. The whisper brings peace to torment. When your heart is troubled, when anxiety grips your mind, and when circumstances seem impossible, the voice of God enters like a gentle current of still water flowing over your soul. It does not fight with the noise, it simply enters, and the chaos begins to dissipate. There is a supernatural calm that accompanies his whisper, a sense of assurance that transcends understanding. You may not yet see how things will turn around, but the whisper communicates a reality higher than the visible. It tells you that your situation does not define you, that your life is in the hands of the Almighty, and that divine intervention is closer than you think. The whisper brings light to darkness. There are times in life when everything feels heavy, when decisions are clouded, when hope seems distant. In those moments, the soft voice of God cuts through the shadow and illuminates a path. It is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it is subtle, a gentle nudge, a small impression, a thought that comes with clarity unlike any other. But even in its subtlety, it carries illumination. You begin to see opportunities, discern truth from deception, and recognize the strategies of the enemy before they manifest. The whisper is a light that guides your steps when all else seems dim. It reveals the unseen and directs you toward the will of God, even when the world around you is in confusion. The whisper brings life to what seemed dead. Relationships that were broken, dreams that had faded, and hopes that had been buried begin to stir when God speaks. The breath of heaven touches areas where human effort has failed. Where others have given up, where failure seemed permanent, God's whisper speaks resurrection. It awakens the dormant, strengthens the weak, and brings healing to what was once considered beyond repair. The moment you recognize that whisper, you understand that no situation is too hopeless, no past too tainted, no mistake too great. The whisper is the voice of possibility, the sound of restoration, the spark that ignites life where there was death. The transformation is not just external, it is internal. One whisper has the power to change your thinking, reshape your priorities, and recalibrate your emotions. Your spirit begins to align with heaven's perspective, and suddenly what seemed impossible becomes natural. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, and believe differently. Your faith grows in proportion to your ability to hear and respond to that whisper. The transformation touches every area of your life, spiritual, emotional, and even physical, because God's voice works in completeness. It is not partial, it is total. When you allow that whisper to penetrate your soul, it brings renewal, clarity, and empowerment that is beyond human ability to produce. The whisper of God is specific. It speaks directly to your situation, your season, and your calling. It is never generic. It addresses the heart of the matter and brings insight that is uniquely designed for you. While sermons, books, and advice can be helpful, they are often general and lack personalization. God's whisper knows your name, your struggle, your potential, and your need. It is calibrated perfectly to speak to you, in your time, in your place, with precision. The personal nature of the whisper makes it irresistible. You recognize it immediately because it resonates with your spirit. It carries truth that confirms, challenges, and motivates all at once. The whisper is transformative because it bypasses fear. When God speaks, even softly, your spirit responds with courage. The voice of the enemy may scream, circumstances may threaten, and the world may oppose, but the whisper instills a confidence that rises above all opposition. It is a supernatural assurance that says, I am with you. You are not alone. This is your moment. Step forward. That whisper empowers you to act in faith, even when the path is unclear. It strengthens resolve, emboldens decision-making, and infuses your soul with courage. One whisper from heaven can make a timid heart brave, a hesitant believer bold, and a wavering spirit steadfast. The whisper carries revelation. Knowledge from heaven comes in moments of quiet intimacy. Sometimes you will not hear God speak through textbooks, conferences, or even sermons. He chooses a moment when you are alone, when your heart is open, and when your spirit is receptive to impart insight. That whisper explains situations that once seemed confusing, clarifies decisions that were clouded, and reveals strategies for victory. It connects the dots of your life in ways human wisdom cannot. The revelation in the whisper is practical, applicable, and timely. It is the divine guidance that positions you for breakthrough, advancement, and supernatural alignment with God's purpose. The whisper also restores hope. When despair is heavy, when disappointment is constant, when faith begins to waver, the voice of God brings encouragement that lifts the soul. It reminds you that you are remembered, that your efforts are seen, and that your life matters in the kingdom of heaven. The whisper does not minimize your struggles. It empowers you to face them with renewed confidence. It replaces doubt with assurance, weakness with strength, and fear with courage. The hope that flows from the whisper is anchored in the character of God, not in temporary circumstances. It carries a permanence that human encouragement cannot replicate. The whisper can redirect your steps. Many times, life is filled with choices that seem overwhelming. Decisions weigh heavy on the mind, and uncertainty clouds the heart. God's whisper provides guidance that is both subtle and profound. It leads you away from danger toward opportunity and into alignment with His will. That whisper is a compass calibrated by heaven. It is the voice of wisdom that surpasses human reasoning. When you respond, you find yourself in places of divine provision, protection, and favor. The redirection that comes from the whisper is never arbitrary. It is intentional, strategic, and perfect for the timing of your life. The whisper carries intimacy. It is the sound of God speaking directly to your spirit, not to a crowd, not to a multitude, but to you. That personal connection deepens your relationship with Him. You begin to understand that God desires closeness, not just compliance. He wants conversation, communion, and fellowship. The whisper is a sign of love, attention, and presence. It tells you that you are not just another face in the crowd, not just a number, but a cherished child of God whose life matters to Him. That intimacy transforms how you approach prayer, worship, and daily living. You begin to live with awareness of His presence, sensitivity to His guidance, and reverence for His voice. The whisper has the power to ignite faith. Hearing God call your name, or speaking to your situation in the stillness, awakens belief where doubt once resided. It brings assurance that what He has spoken, He will also fulfill. Faith begins to grow exponentially when coupled with the personal touch of heaven's voice. The whisper strengthens confidence in His promises, increases patience in waiting, and fuels perseverance in the process. It carries a momentum that human encouragement cannot supply. One whisper can generate the faith required to step out in obedience. Even when the natural senses see no evidence, the whisper shapes destiny. Every divine word carries creative power. Every whisper spoken over your life initiates processes that bring about change, growth, and fulfillment of God's plan. You begin to operate under divine instruction, guided by supernatural understanding. The whisper aligns your thoughts, actions, and decisions with heaven. It becomes the roadmap for your purpose, the foundation for your destiny, and the source of supernatural breakthrough. When you recognize it, embrace it, and act upon it, the whisper becomes more than a message. It becomes the key to walking in fullness, blessing and eternal alignment with God's plan. The whisper carries peace that surpasses understanding. In the midst of turmoil, conflict, or internal struggle, hearing the voice of God in that intimate way brings a calm that nothing else can produce. It settles your heart, strengthens your spirit, and reassures your mind. The whisper is not simply a sound, it is an impartation of divine peace that steadies your soul, reassures your faith, and prepares you for the challenges ahead. It confirms that heaven is attentive, that God is involved, and that His power is available to change circumstances, influence outcomes, and bring fulfillment to promises. The whisper of God is powerful enough to reshape every part of your life. It teaches obedience, awakens purpose, restores hope, brings clarity, strengthens faith, ignites courage, and aligns your destiny. One whisper can accomplish what a lifetime of human effort cannot. It is supernatural, transformative, personal, and eternal. It works invisibly yet tangibly, internally yet practically, immediately yet progressively. The moment you hear it and respond, you step into a realm where heaven and earth intersect, where the Spirit guides, and where the impossible begins to become reality. The whisper is not just a voice. It is a key to walking in divine alignment. Hearing God's whisper isn't the end. It's the beginning of obedience. When heaven speaks, it does not do so to entertain or merely inspire. It calls you to act. The whisper demands a response because faith without action is incomplete. Many hear the voice of God but stop at the sensation, treating it like a warm feeling or a spiritual experience. The true power of the whisper is released only when it produces movement, when it compels you to step beyond comfort into the territory of faith. Obedience is the natural outcome of hearing heaven's voice. It is the bridge between revelation and manifestation, between promise and fulfillment, between hearing and experiencing the reality of God's plan. When you hear God whisper your name, it is a summons out of the ordinary. He calls you out of complacency, out of fear, out of routines that confine the spirit. Obedience begins with a willingness to leave familiar territory and follow the promptings of heaven. That first step may be small, perhaps only a prayer of surrender or a choice to forgive, but it carries the potential for monumental change. The whisper is never passive, it is active, dynamic, and directional. It is designed to provoke action, to initiate movement, and to guide your life into alignment with God's will. Without that response, the whisper remains dormant, a voice heard but unheeded, like a seed that falls on barren ground. Faith and obedience are inseparable companions. When the whisper comes, it requires that you trust beyond what you see. It may call you to speak when silence seems safer, to step forward when hesitation is natural, to give when scarcity feels real, or to wait when impatience tempts you. Every whisper tests faith because God's voice is designed to develop dependence upon Him. It stretches your spiritual muscles, shapes your character, and strengthens your resolve. The call of heaven always demands trust, because walking in obedience proves that your relationship with God is anchored in faith rather than circumstance. Obedience validates the reality of what you have heard, and faith confirms the reliability of the one who speaks. The whisper calls for timing. Obedience is not just about action. It is about action in alignment with God's timing. Sometimes you may feel prompted to act immediately, and other times to wait. The Spirit knows the difference. The whisper teaches discernment, guiding you in the precision of timing that produces maximum impact. Acting too soon or too late can hinder the fullness of God's plan, but responding in exact timing releases blessings, protection, and provision. The whisper orchestrates the sequence of steps in your life so that what is promised manifests in a way that honors heaven's design. Obedience in timing is not restrictive. It is liberating because it ensures that every step is supported by supernatural authority. Obedience to the whisper often requires courage. God rarely calls you into the ordinary. He calls you into situations that defy logic, circumstances that challenge comfort, and opportunities that require trust in Him alone. The first steps of obedience may provoke fear or uncertainty, but the whisper strengthens resolve. Courage arises from understanding that the voice you heard is higher than any threat, wiser than any challenge, and stronger than any opposition. Each act of obedience is a demonstration of trust, an act of spiritual alignment, and a declaration that heaven's authority outweighs earthly circumstance. The whisper empowers courage because it carries the backing of the Almighty. Obedience brings alignment with purpose. When you respond to God's whisper, you enter into a rhythm that heaven intended from the beginning. Your decisions, actions, and steps begin to harmonize with divine strategy. Life no longer feels random or chaotic because you are moving in sync with the plan of the Creator. Each act of obedience positions you for breakthroughs, provision, and favor. It connects your choices with God's timing and channels the supernatural into your natural. When you walk in response to the whisper, you begin to notice doors opening that could not have opened on your own, opportunities arising that seemed impossible, and people appearing at just the right moment. Obedience transforms circumstances because it places you under divine orchestration. The whisper cultivates humility. To act on what God whispers requires surrender. Pride resists direction. It wants to assert control, make decisions based on self-interest, and rely on human understanding. Obedience to the whisper teaches you that God's wisdom surpasses your own, that His perspective is higher, and that His timing is perfect. Each step in response to the whisper is a lesson in submission, a refinement of character, and a deepening of intimacy with heaven. Humility allows the whisper to lead you without interference from human pride or self-will. The more you obey, the more your life reflects alignment with God's heart and purpose. Obedience produces fruit. Every time you respond to the whisper, seeds of destiny are sown. What seems small or insignificant in the moment often yields tremendous results over time. That first act of faith can multiply into opportunities, breakthroughs, and manifestations that reshape your life and the lives of others. Obedience creates pathways for miracles to flow. The whisper is a channel, and your response activates the flow of heaven. Without obedience, the channel remains dormant. With obedience, the power of God moves through your life in ways that exceed natural expectation. The whisper becomes more than instruction. It becomes the engine of supernatural increase and divine favor. Obedience also strengthens your sensitivity to God's voice. Each act of response tunes your spirit to recognize future whispers more clearly. It develops discernment and sharpens spiritual perception. When you obey, you are not just following instructions, you are training your spirit to recognize the cadence, tone, and rhythm of heaven. The more you respond, the more natural it becomes to distinguish God's voice from other influences, to discern truth from deception, and to align your actions with divine direction. Obedience is a form of spiritual conditioning that prepares you for greater revelation, greater responsibility, and greater impact. The whisper of God often calls you to act in alignment with others. Obedience is rarely isolated. It intersects with relationships, community, and purpose. The voice of heaven may direct you to speak to someone, to forgive, to encourage, or to partner with others in ministry or service. These acts of obedience are extensions of the whisper, amplifying its effect through collective impact. When you respond, you become a vessel through which heaven operates. Your obedience has the potential to release blessings, revelation, and transformation in the lives of others. One person obeying the whisper can trigger a chain reaction of divine intervention. Obedience strengthens faith under testing. The whisper does not always promise immediate results. Often it requires you to act without visible evidence of success. That is where faith is exercised and matured. Acting on the whisper despite uncertainty produces resilience, perseverance, and spiritual authority. Every step of obedience in the face of delay or difficulty trains you to trust God fully. It proves that your faith is not circumstantial, but anchored in the character of the one who speaks. Obedience in these moments establishes spiritual credibility and positions you for long-term impact. Obedience also releases supernatural favor. When you act on the whisper, God's hand moves to support your steps. Circumstances begin to align in ways that defy natural understanding. Resources appear, opportunities open, and protection manifests. The whisper is a channel of provision, and obedience activates that channel. Your actions become synchronized with heaven, producing results that could not occur through human effort alone. The favor that flows from obedience accelerates destiny, opens doors, and amplifies impact. What seemed impossible now becomes attainable because divine authority accompanies your obedience. The whisper builds intimacy with God. Obedience is a form of communication with heaven. Each act of response tells God, I trust you, I follow you, I yield to your direction. That relational exchange deepens your connection with Him. It moves beyond ritual or religion into genuine fellowship. You begin to experience the closeness, presence, and guidance of God in a tangible way. Intimacy is cultivated through consistent responsiveness, and the whisper becomes a daily invitation to walk in harmony with His Spirit. Obedience opens the door to revelation and destiny. The whisper carries insight, instruction, and direction, but the fullness of its impact is realized only through action. The moment you respond, you enter into a flow of divine strategy. Your steps become aligned with heaven, your opportunities synchronized with purpose, and your life positioned for influence. Obedience transforms potential into reality, intention into action, and promise into fulfillment. The whisper becomes a living reality, not just heard but experienced, not just acknowledged but manifested. The moment you begin to act on God's whisper, your life begins to shift. What was theoretical becomes practical. What was hoped for begins to materialize, and what was dormant comes to life. The whisper is no longer merely a voice. It becomes a guide, a catalyst, and a force of transformation. Each act of obedience compounds, building momentum for greater breakthroughs. The pathway of faith, once invisible, becomes clear. The presence of God, once felt but unseen, becomes tangible in circumstances, opportunities, and relationships. Obedience is the bridge between hearing and experiencing, between whisper and manifestation, between promise and reality. The whisper of God is not intended for passive reception. It is active. It requires your participation. The moment you respond, heaven begins to operate on your behalf. Obedience activates supernatural processes, aligns your life with divine purpose, and releases blessing in ways beyond natural understanding. That first step, no matter how small, unlocks the flow of heaven. It transforms your faith from theory to practice, from hearing to living, from potential to manifestation. The whisper is the call. Obedience is the key that unlocks its power.